Let me make sure I put my phone on silence. Yep, so. Great. All right. No, take your time. Okay. Let's start then. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. I pay homage to the Sublime Mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the inexpressible, inconceivable, and indescribable perfection of wisdom, which is unborn, unceasing, and of the nature of space, and which is the object of realization of the self-knowing primordial wisdom. Okay, great. I'm not sure I need the microphone.
You have to be speaking fluently.
Wow, this is probably the smallest class we've had so far, maybe. Wow. Okay. Now, first of all, let's see. First of all, there were quite a few comments, which was great. Quite a few, I don't know whether I can address all of them, but some questions in the discussion group, which I thought were quite relevant to what we're doing here. So it starts with Hella. She says, to be of one nature. One nature is such an important concept in Buddhism. It is so important. And in many of the discussions between Buddhists and non-Buddhists that are recorded in the scriptures, whether they really took place or not, it doesn't really matter. But a lot of the discussions are about being one nature, being of a different nature, or the misunderstanding of what it means to be of one nature or to be of a different nature. I think the main reason is because we hold on to intrinsic existence. Because we hold on to intrinsic existence, to be of one nature seems for us to mean to be identical, to be one. Being of a different nature means to be totally separate. And that is also reflected in the fact when we meditate on the self in relation to the aggregates, we're not analyzing where is the self that is of one nature with the aggregates. We never do that. We always analyze a self that is either one with the aggregates or totally different. Why? Because if the self were to exist intrinsically, those are the only two options. An intrinsically existent self does not allow for a self that is of one nature with the aggregates. Why? Because if it were of one nature with the aggregates, it would depend on them. Two things that are of one nature, they depend on each other. At least one of them depends on the other. So if the self were to be of one nature with the aggregates, it would have to depend on the aggregates. But an intrinsically existent self doesn't depend on anything. So it's okay that it's one with the aggregates. If hypothetically there were such a self, it were one with the aggregates, that it depends on itself, there's no problem. Right? Because it would be one with the aggregates, it would be identical to the aggregates. So there would be no difference between aggregates and self. Therefore, the only thing it depends on is itself. And there's no problem with that being intrinsically existent, hypothetically. We're thinking hypothetically, if intrinsic existence were possible, either it's one with the aggregates or totally separate from them, because being dependent on them without being identical to them wouldn't make sense. You see how that works? So, therefore, I guess it's our sense of intrinsic existence that is so deeply ingrained that the idea of one nature without being exactly the same or being different while being of one nature means to us they're totally separate, right? So one nature means either they're totally exactly the same, or if we say, okay, they're one nature but different, then different we take to mean totally different. And then they're no longer of one nature. Anyway, it's such a difficult concept, and I talked to one of my teachers yesterday who teaches a lot in Korea. He teaches a lot of Chinese students, mainly Korean students, and he said that's one of the most difficult things to explain, one nature. How do you explain one nature? So I'm waiting for Tomer. If he does show up today with the rain, I'm not sure, but let's see, because he's talked about it as well. But as Hella says, to be of one nature. So I want to say one thing I want him to hear. But in the meantime, she says, to say that two things are of one nature, would that be like saying there are two sides of a medal? I guess she means like two sides of the same coin. No, two sides of the same coin doesn't necessarily mean they're of one nature. I mean, it depends on how you see it. Like the two sides of a coin, they're different entities. There's no, one coin and the other coin. Like one side, the other side, one is not a part of the other. They're totally separate. I mean, it depends on what you mean with the side. But if you just mean the surface, that's like my right arm and my left arm, right? The surface of the coin, the upper surface and the lower surface. They're like my two arms, connected in the middle, by my trunk. You would call it trunk, right? By that, but in actuality, they're different entities, my two arms. So similarly, the two coins of a medal are also different entities, but if she doesn't mean it literally, because sometimes we talk about the true truth as being two sides of one coin, but we don't literally mean that, one is stuck to one side to a coin and the other. No, we mean different perspective, kind of different perspective, looking at the same thing from a different perspective. And of course we know, for instance, a vase or a table being a conventional truth and its emptiness is an ultimate truth. Those two are of one nature because the emptiness of the vase is a part of the vase without which the vase couldn't exist. Or in the case of the table, without which the emptiness of the table is a part of the table. It's a characteristic of the table, without which there wouldn't be a table. Therefore, we look at the table in one way. It does exist. It exists conventionally as being merely labeled. That's one side. And then the other side would be, well, at the same time, it lacks intrinsic existence. So sometimes people say that's like looking at a coin it's like two sides of the same coin. But not really literally, because otherwise that would be of different nature. Okay. But it's not necessarily so. Actually, the reason why the true truth are of one nature, actually they're not of one nature. In general, the ultimate truth is not of one nature with the conventional truth. It's a specific conventional truth, such as the table. Its ultimate truth is of one nature with the table. Does that make sense? Can you see the difference? Should I repeat that? Yes. We don't say that ultimate truth and conventional truth in general are one nature. Why would they be? Why would they be? Permanent and impermanent are not one nature. Okay, they're not exactly the same, but I don't think, no, there's no way. Why would the ultimate truth be of one nature with the conventional truth? They're contradictory. And the only way that we can say they're of one nature is we take a specific conventional truth A table is a conventional truth, right? It's a little funny in English, the way we talk, like truth don't seem to be the things themselves. Usually you don't say, this table is a truth. But here we're, of course, literally translating from the Tibetan or from the Sanskrit. So truth here refers to the actual objects. And anyway, a table is not really a truth, it's only a conventional truth. But that's beside the point. So what I'm trying to say is that the table is a conventional truth, and its ultimate truth is of one nature with the table, because it's inseparably linked to it. You couldn't have a table without its intrinsic existence, and without the table, you couldn't have the lack of intrinsic existence of the table. They depend on each other, in fact. Okay. All right. And then Bernd. Okay, Bernd needs to do something about editing his messages a little bit. I'm not really sure I understand them. I think I understand this message. It's all about generalities. Now, Venerable Kumbinla said she had a hard time with generalities. So let's see again. Generalities, so important. I like what Rika put in the group. She said categories, concepts, but categories. So usually I think it's easier for us to look at it that way. We talk about categories, don't we? Right? So actually, when we say wooden table, that would be a category of table. So what is table? Table is the basis of a category. It's the basis of a division. For instance, when you take man, right, or human, right? Human being is the basis of a division, and then however you want to divide male, female, or a third category, it doesn't matter, but these are all divisions of a human being. So human being is the basis of the division. Now, similarly, when you take generality, it's just another way of saying the basis of a division. Take table. But table, when I say table as like a basis of dividing all the tables that exist, right? It kind of sounds like as if there were like an overarching table somewhere in space. Well, let's go back to numbers. We discussed numbers based on that video that Ellen posted in the group. When someone asks, how do numbers exist? So number is a generality. One is a generality. What is an instance of one? One mobile phone. Right? So one, how does it exist? Somewhere out in space? That would be the Platonian view. Platonists having this sense that there are these universals. And that's very interesting, the word universal. There are philosophical views that talk about these universals that exist outside of time and space. And these views, a lot of non-Buddhists had too, at the time when the Buddha was around, and the Buddha refuted that. He refuted this idea that there is this table that exists outside of time and space, a universal, which encompasses all tables that exist, but somehow it exists beyond those. That is, no. We can talk about table in general, we can label table, and then we can say table exists, right? Taking that characteristic that every single table has in common, which is being a table, we kind of separate that out conceptually and say that is the generality. It's not wrong to say that, just as we do it with the number one, right? There is no number one. Oops, still working hopefully. There is no number one floating somewhere outside of time and space. However, we can still say that one exists because all these single objects, right? Single people, single phones, single whatever, right? They all have one thing in common, they're just one. Therefore, one exists. One is the basis of the division of everything that is a single object. That's what a generality means, nothing else. It's merely labeled, but it's important. Why? It's important. I mean, who cares? right? But this is how our conceptual mind works. It likes to categorize things. Our sense consciousnesses cannot do that. Our conceptual minds, they can do that. They recognize the similarity between two objects and create these categories. That's how we learned language. Every single table, right? We know it's a table. Why? Not because every time when we were little, someone had to show us anew, again and again. This is a table. This is also a table. This is also a table. We didn't have to learn it that way. That would be ridiculous. Our parents would be so busy pointing out every table in the world, every pen in the world. No, all they had to do was show us that these are the characteristics of a table. That's what table means. And therefore, if you see this somewhere else, you know it's called table. Initially, we would make some mistakes. That's why it's so cute when children make mistakes when they mislabel things. Kind of cute, depending on what they mislabel. But the point is, we basically recognized what these individual objects have in common. And if they all have in common that they're a table, we apply the word table. We say a table exists. We can even use it conceptually as a category. So that's a generality.
Actually, I think it's more that generalities are permanent.
No.
No. There's a confusion.
Oh, that's where the confusion.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I went on and on thinking you didn't understand generalities. Okay. Okay, so your problem is not saying that like a table is a generality or whatever. A phone is a generality. You are a generality of all of your instances, right? Yeah, that's not a problem. But that generality itself is permanent. Okay, all right, I get that. That is a little bit difficult, but it's still a very important idea in philosophy. So let me talk about that as well. Whatever exists, we can all agree, whatever exists is either permanent or impermanent. Can you agree? This is the rule. It's not true that this is not always the case. For instance, when we say whatever exists has to be male or female, even if there were only two categories, right? Let's say there were only male and female. If you say a human being is one of the two, male or female, no, it's neither nor. I mean, you can't say it's one of the two. So, okay, this doesn't work in this case. But with permanent and impermanent, you have to say whatever exists is either permanent or impermanent. Okay, so this we can all agree on. Whatever exists is either permanent or impermanent. Now let's look at a generality. Either a generality changes or it doesn't. Two of the possibilities. Okay, all right, so what is it? A generality itself. Does it change moment by moment or does it not? Now it comes a little difficult. Now from a philosophical point of view, the agreement is, and it's an agreement basically, that if there is a generality that is permanent, are there generalities that are permanent?
Concepts and things like that.
The emptiness, right? Emptiness is a generality. Why is that a generality? Because the emptiness of the table is an instance of it, the generality of the phone, the generality of each one, the emptiness, what did I say? No, not generality, the emptiness, yeah. So the emptiness of each one of us, the emptiness of the tables here, of the mattresses and all these are instances of a generality. So the generality, therefore, called emptiness, is permanent. Okay. But the generality that is a table is impermanent. So, therefore, there's this agreement. It's really more of an agreement. If there is something that is a generality that is permanent, then generality in general is permanent. That's the rule. That's it. You can remember it in that way. If a generality, because it has to be permanent or impermanent, one of the two things. So how do you decide? Whatever exists is either permanent or impermanent. It depends. You can't say that. Different to saying whatever exists is either, let's say, is either male or female. Whatever is a human being is either male or female. If we were to agree on that, I'm not saying it's not politically correct to say that, but no, I mean, sure, it's fair enough that we have another category, but I don't know the exact term for it. So let's just say hypothetically, if that were the case, whatever is a human being must be male or female. So what about a human being? Are they male or female? That you can't answer. Okay, so is a human being male or female? It depends. You can't say, okay, that's fine. In this case, it's fine. But permanent and impermanent doesn't work that way.
How do you answer this in debates? Like take human being for...
Do you say rando? You say rando, which means you're basically saying in general. So this is a really funny answer. Rando, you say rando. Rando means you're just positing the thing itself. So positing the thing itself in this particular. So when you say rangto, you're saying you're positing the thing itself. So rangto meaning positing the thing itself. What you're implying is saying you're positing something that in itself can be neither of this. It's neither. A human being is neither male nor female. However, if someone is a human, they must be included in male or female. So there's a bit of a difference. Human in general.
Take human in general, it follows it is male. And then you would answer...
No. You would say no, or you would say rando. You would say you're talking about it in general.
As the answer, you say.
As the answer. But you can also say it's neither. You can also say, take the subject, a human being, it follows that they're a woman. Why? It follows that they're a man. Why? It follows the category of human being is not this category. Why?
Because it is not male?
It's not male, it's not female.
I suppose it is not male.
It follows it's not male.
I'd
say accept. So if you were to debate, so Tommy, if you're saying, I just repeat it because I forgot to repeat it last time. So take the subject, a human being, it follows that they're male. You would say, it follows they're not male, I accept. It follows they're not female, I accept. Yeah, that would be a correct answer. You could also just say rando, which means you're positing something that in and of itself is neither, implied by that. So that is okay for male and female. That's okay for a lot of categories. The category color. When we start learning philosophy, we learn about colors. Colors can be divided into primary colors and secondary colors. Primary colors and secondary colors. So take the subject, a color. It follows it's a primary color. Why? It follows it is a secondary color. Why? It follows it's none of the two. I accept. It follows those two are not a division of color. Why? Still, you'd have to say that they are a division of it, but they're none of the two. Okay? Because those two are not directly contradictory. Male and female are not directly contradictory. In other words, if two things are directly contradictory, then whatever exists has to be one of the two. Male and female, a vase is neither male nor female. Therefore, male and female are not directly contradictory, direct opposites. Nor are primary colors and secondary colors, because there are a lot of things that are not colors. That's why you cannot say that, for instance, a color is either a primary color or a secondary color. If it were one of the two, it would mean that colors, primary and secondary colors, would have to be directly contradictory. And then you could say it's one of the two. Therefore, directly contradictory, like permanent and impermanent, are directly contradictory. Whatever exists is one of the two. I mean, it's very obvious from the definition. Whatever exists either changes moment by moment or it does not. To give you another example of something that's directly contradictory, table and not table. Whatever exists is either a table or not a table. Right? It seems like that is so absurd. That something as basic as a table and not being a table holds that label. It includes all phenomena, but logically it does. either something when it exists is a table or is not a table. Does that make sense? Similarly, either something that exists, it changes moment by moment, or it doesn't. Therefore, we can say whatever exists has to be permanent or impermanent, simply by looking at the definition, changing moment by moment, or an existent thing, something that exists that doesn't change moment by moment. It becomes obvious, whatever exists has to be one of the two. So going back to the generality, it has to be permanent or impermanent. How do we decide? Well, we say, usually there's this agreement, as I said, and it also makes sense, but that it makes sense takes a little bit more to understand. But there's this agreement. Okay, so how do I decide? If there's a generality that happens to be permanent, then generality itself is permanent. That's why existent is also permanent. Existent, right? Existent is permanent. Why? Because there's something that is permanent and that exists. Emptiness.
It's the same reasoning.
It's the same reasoning for everything.
The existence, it follows it is impermanent because it follows because there is something which is existent and is impermanent.
Exactly. Existence itself.
When take existence, it follows it is impermanent because there is something which is impermanent.
Well, that's what I just said. That's the agreement. That's the agreement. But you see, the question, that's what I also just said to Kumbila. It's right now, it's a little difficult to understand why that makes sense, right? Why? That's exactly Thomas' question. Why, if something is permanent, if there's a common locus, if there's something that is both permanent and existent, we say existent is permanent. But if there's something that is both impermanent and existent, it's not impermanent. Why? That seems unfair, right? It has to be one of the two. It has to be one of the two. You can't say existent itself is both. Okay. So why saying that it itself, it doesn't change? I don't know. It's just, I mean, to me it makes sense because I'm so used to, but I don't know how to explain it, in other words. I wouldn't, because like, it's kind of like an abstract as well. The abstract. But you can't always argue with abstract because existent is not that abstract.
I think impermanence. Impermanence is also abstract the same way.
But impermanence, yeah, exactly, these things, like existent. Yeah, that's the thing. With abstract, the problem is existent is not that abstract. Something existing is not that abstract. You can even perceive it with your eye consciousness that something exists, although not explicitly, but implicitly you can know something exists, so it can't be that abstract. But, okay, impermanence, you can't see with your eye consciousness, it merely appears. That's more abstract, and still impermanence is said to be impermanent because there's nothing that is impermanent and permanent at the same time. So there's nothing that is both permanent and that phenomenon impermanent, therefore impermanent is permanent, is impermanent. Yeah, why is that? And usually, and this is also confusing, just because something is not doesn't mean that it's not in general. Does that make sense? So just because something is, in a particular situation, something is not changing moment by moment, why would that mean in general it doesn't change moment by moment? To give you another example, just because something is not existent on this table doesn't mean it doesn't exist in general. You see, when I apply not with regard to one thing, it doesn't mean that in general that the thing, so for instance, does that not exist because there's something on the basis of which this does not exist, the table? So there's no pervasion. It's enough that this exists somewhere for it to exist. However, when we say just because one thing is not changing moment by moment, then that thing doesn't exist, then that thing in general doesn't change moment by moment, it doesn't seem to make sense. And still, I guess I'm so used to it that I've accepted it. But yeah, you can debate that. It won't be a long debate. Because someone is going to give you an answer and you may not find it satisfactory, but that's it. It's just that agreement. And maybe, the thing is like, one thing I tell you, One thing is, of the two, permanent and impermanent, permanent is somehow vaster. But then again, you would ask why. Again, it comes to the same point. Why is it generality? Because, for instance, the existence of vast, the emptiness of vast, would you agree that the emptiness is permanent?
Emptiness?
The emptiness is permanent?
Emptiness in general.
Yeah, lack of intrinsic. Would you agree that lack of intrinsic existence, because it is a non-information, right? You're just saying lack of, you're just referring to the lack of something that doesn't exist. Would you agree, independent of having a common locus or there being something that is, just in general, would you agree that it's permanent?
Yes.
Okay, so then an impermanent phenomenon can have a permanent quality. But a permanent phenomenon can never have an impermanent characteristic.
Emptiness of a cup is permanent, but its basis is impermanent.
No, I didn't say basis. I said the characteristic. I said a permanent basis can never have an impermanent characteristic.
But is it emptiness of a cup? Its basis.
Listen, Tommy. You didn't listen. You didn't listen. The emptiness of the cup, what is the characteristic? What is the basis? I'm saying if the basis is permanent, can the characteristic be impermanent? You're doing it the other way around. You're saying the basis is impermanent, the cup, and it has a permanent characteristic. That's possible. But switch it around.
But emptiness of a cup as a basis.
Okay, but what's its characteristic?
Its basis.
So the emptiness of the cup is the basis. What is the impermanent characteristic? Don't tell me the cup.
But it's conventional truth.
The emptiness of the cup is a conventional truth?
It's conventional truth. A conventional truth of...
The conventional truth of an ultimate truth? Conventional truth is permanent anyways. Show me something that is impermanent, like it's conventional truth. What is the conventional truth of the emptiness?
Like form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Right?
But there is no. What is the conventional truth of emptiness? There is no conventional truth of emptiness. Posit the conventional truth of emptiness.
Emptiness of a cup.
That is that's not the conventional truth of the cup. It's the ultimate truth of the cup.
No, but a conventional truth of emptiness of a cup.
The conventional truth of the emptiness of the cup. Posit that. That is the conventional truth of the emptiness?
Of a cup. I think so. No?
Conventional truth. It's the basis upon which the emptiness. That doesn't even make sense. No. I have to do it in Tibetan to hear whether it makes sense. No. Okay. That works. No. But anyway, think about it. It's good. He's very good what he's doing, like playing around with these words. Sorry, I know you wanted to ask something, just to say. So therefore, there is no permanent thing as a basis that has impermanent characteristics. So somehow permanent is more powerful. But then you could still say, okay, yeah, but again, that's kind of a circular argument because I've said existent is not permanent, is not impermanent. So, okay, never mind what I said.
Find on an impermanent basis.
Did I actually bring an umbrella? I did, right? I put it there. Okay, great. I'm just seeing it. Already thinking of going home. All right. Anyway, so this is a little bit complicated. So let's say it's been an agreement. It's an agreement. You can always debate it, but that's how it's been agreed upon. Yeah. I've also had that question, and I thought I came to some conclusion, but I haven't thought about it for so long. I don't remember the conclusion. That I don't know, but it just feels right. Please go ahead.
We've already moved on, I think, but I was thinking about the generality of table.
The generality of table?
Doesn't it make sense that the generality came itself from the first few instances of table when there was still no generality of table, and then now that tables exist, now tables are instances of the generality, but before the generality came from the instances.
Okay. So isn't that about the generality? Wasn't there a time when it came into existence? Did the generality of table exist when the first table came into existence? Well, let's think about the way to check whether something is the generality of something else. Number one, let's take this table. It has three, like saying that it's a characteristic of a table, there's a way to check it, whether the three characteristics are fulfilled. Number one is, it is a table. Okay, so the wooden table is a table, we can all agree. Number two, they are one nature. Okay, let's pretend we understood that. I mean, no, it's an instant of the table, therefore we say it's of one nature. Number three, there is something that is not this table, but a table. So in the case of the very first wooden table, what about the third characteristic? There's something that is a table, but is not that particular table. I think you need to have two at least to have a generality, right? There's something, or actually in Tibetan, it's even though they say it, no, they don't say there's something, they say there's many things. They go as far as that. There are many things. Oh yeah, they say there's something that is there are many things. There are not this table, but that there are tables. So you need many instances. So how many is many? Is three enough? Maybe three is enough to be many. But at least three. I don't know.
No, doesn't that mean that the generality of the table itself is impermanent because it changes in these moments from not existing to existing?
Oh, so you're saying something is impermanent if there was a time it didn't exist and now it exists. Well, very easy. Who wants to debate? Take the subject, the emptiness of this. It follows it's not permanent. It's not permanent?
Emptiness.
Somehow everyone agrees with emptiness. Okay, it follows that the emptiness of this toy, is not permanent because there was a time when it didn't exist, and there's a time when it goes out of existence. That's not what permanent means. That means eternal versus non-eternal. Permanent and impermanent, the way we use it in English, sometimes it seems to suggest, yes, eternal is permanent. But no, it means something very different. It's changing moment by moment. So you can have things that are permanent, that are not eternal. You can have things that are eternal but impermanent. That distinction is important. Anyway, great. This is great. A little bit of today, because there are not many people, but not just that. I mean, there may be some. Of course, there's some online. So, but I wanted to address some of the points you made, and some are so important because the philosophy behind everything we do, when that is not understood to some degree. For instance, being of one nature. Oh yes, being of one nature. I wanted to say something about that. Geshe Dorje Damdul, I misinterpreted his explanation last time. Geshe Dorje Damdul said last time when I read what he said, actually what he said was, if, for instance, you take a book and its page number 1, they are one nature because not only when you point at page number 1, you also point at the book, but also when you point at the book, there is a possibility if you keep pointing, you will at some point point at page number 1. Right? That possibility exists. I didn't recognize that from the way it was formulated. So anyway, that makes a lot of sense. But now we need to apply it to other things. Another thing is a generality and its instance. Okay. Now here you could say again, if you point at a wooden table, you point at table. Works perfectly. And if you point at a table in general, if you could hypothetically point at a table in general, you keep pointing. At some point, you could point at a wooden table. Okay, let's say that even worked. Okay, that's still possible. But now the difficulty arises with, for instance, let's say you have, and I'll tell you why I say that, a chocolate vase. A vase made of chocolate. Take a vase made of chocolate. It follows it's a vase. It follows it's a visible object. Right? It follows it is of one nature with its taste. So when you point at the vase, are you pointing at its taste? If you say yes, you do. If you point at the taste, you point at the... How do you point at the taste? Okay, let's say you could do that. You point at the taste and you also point at the vase. All right, but then I'm asking you, does the smell of the vase, does the smell of this chocolate vase and the taste of the chocolate vase, are they of one nature? And the answer is no. The smell of the vase and the taste of the chocolate vase. I say chocolate vase because who's going to bite into a wooden vase or something? So that's why I use chocolate vase. So a vase is a visible object. It has a shape and color. Thinking of chocolate. It has a shape and color, but it has a shape and color, but at the same time, in this case, it has a taste, it has a smell. The vase and its taste are of one nature. The vase and its smell are of one nature, but smell and taste are not of one nature. Then the whole thing with pointing becomes really difficult. And now comes the most difficult part. I was on the phone with one of my teachers yesterday for an hour and a half on mind and mental factors. Because it's so difficult and so many people say different things. But mind and mental factors, what does that even mean? It means you have one mind with many different functions. And these functions are all one nature with itself. So if you have one mind, of course the main mind is a one nature with its mental factors. That's easy because they're part of it. That's pretty easy. But where does the difficulty come in? That each of the mental factors themselves are of one nature with each other. Yes, with each other. And this I wanted to confirm because I remembered it that way, but I thought maybe I remembered it wrongly. That makes it so difficult because all the analogies that are used, oh my God, that's serious rain. All the analogies that are used to describe mind and mental factors fall short describing this relationship between all the mental factors. The hand and the palm of the hand, yes. Some say, and I don't agree with that. I remember Geshe Tsering in his book on Lorik, he says, the main mind is like the palm of the hand, and the fingers are like the mental factors. That I don't think works. Then I read in one Tibetan commentary, it says the whole hand is like the main mind, and the fingers and the palm are like the mental factors. That is a little bit better, it works a little better, but the problem is the parts are not one nature. One of my favorites is a soup. The whole soup is like the main mind, and each mental factor is like the vegetables and the spices. They all contribute to the whole taste of the soup, right? Each vegetable contributes, each spice contributes, but they all have that unique function of contributing. So that's quite similar to mental factors, but again, they're of a different nature. Yeah, the ingredients, they're a different nature to each other. So I came to, I wonder whether I have to call my neighbor to ask her to close my door, to close my window. I have to call my neighbor. I left my window open. Just a sec, I'll try. Oh no, never mind. It's too late anyway. Okay, so it's too late now. So let's go back to the mental factors. The mental factors, I came up with an analysis and I checked with my teacher and he said it was okay, but he still had to think about it. The way I look at it, you take a particular person, you take the person, Tomer. Okay, Tomer. Tomer, just as a human being, is like the main mind. But Tomer solely from the point of view of being a man, solely from the point of view of being Israeli, solely from the point of view of being a student, right? That is like the mental factors. Because Tomer, solely from the point of view of being a student, is not Tomer solely from the point of view of being an Israeli. right? Because I said solely from that perspective. But it refers to the same person. And they're all part of Tomer in general, right? Tomer solely from the point of view of being, we can conceptually isolate Tomer in that way. And that's what we do with the mental factors. We conceptually isolate all the mental factors in that way, don't we? Does that make sense? What's the problem with that? Because we usually say it's, for instance, feeling is a mental factor of the main mind apprehending a vase, for instance. So feeling is basically seen from the point of view of experiencing pleasure, something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So in this case, perceiving the vase as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Therefore, that's the mental factor. So it's seen solely from the point of view of that function. It's not seen from the point of view of the function of discerning, of distinguishing between its different characteristics, which would be discernment. So it's solely seen from that perspective. But it all refers to the same mind. Just as Tomer, it refers to when you point at this person, here the pointing works again, you point at the same thing, you point at the same person basically. But conceptually, you're separating them out. That's why they all arise at the same time. Tomer, solely seen as from the point of view of the student. Tomer, probably, they all do the same thing, right? Doing the same thing. When Tomer is walking, Tomer solely seen from the point of view of being being a student is walking, right? They all arise at the same time. So I think that would work. That would work as an analogy to understand them. But the problem is we don't realize that they're so close. Even describing the 5 features, those 5 features that they have in common, being of having the same uncommon empowering condition, having the same basis, therefore, having the same observed object, having the same aspect, having the same time or existing at the same time, and so on. It seems like they must be separate. Why would anyone bother to go through all 5 if they mean it's the same mind? All you need to tell me is they're the same mind. You don't need to go, no one tells me that there are 5 features between a phone and the opposite of being a phone, which is the same thing, right? No one is saying they share 5 similarities or 5 features. If I know it refers to the same thing, no one needs to tell me that. But the fact that the scriptures go through all these 5 makes you suspect, causes you to suspect, or maybe they're kind of different. But they're not. And I discussed that with my teacher yesterday. I said, look, these 5 features, they're really misleading. And he saw where that comes from. I mean, if you're so used to it, they thought along these lines all the time, it's not that difficult. But when I wrote it down as part of the handout, and I was thinking, how would people understand this? I kept thinking, if I've already said it refers to the same mind, these 5 features, why do you make such a big deal out of them when it's obvious they must be the same, right? But anyway, I think that's how our mind works. The moment you separate it conceptually, you look at it as totally separate. You look at it as totally separate because you can look at things conceptually in many different ways. That's why we talk about isolates. We conceptually isolate some characteristics. That's what isolate means. You conceptually isolate some aspect of it. Tomer, solely from the perspective of being a student. A mind, a consciousness solely seen from the perspective of experiencing something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Okay, what's your counter debate? Well, think about it. Yeah, I don't know.
Mindfulness and introspection.
Pardon?
Mindfulness and introspection.
Mindfulness is just from the point of view, I mean, it depends on what you mean by mindfulness.
There are meta factors.
Mindfulness, the way it's explained in the West, is actually the interplay between 3 mental factors. But mindfulness in the strictest sense of the word is the function of remembering. That's mindfulness. You see, mindfulness in the West is not exactly the same mindfulness that is part of the mental factors.
Introspection as a mental factor.
Pardon?
Introspection is a mental factor.
Introspection is a mental factor, that's right.
So while watching another object, it's also watching something.
It's not while. It's what Tomer is saying is that while watching one thing, you watch something else. That's not true. You take turns. You go switch back and forth. While I'm talking to you, I'm listening to what you're saying, but every now and then I'm checking. That mental factor of introspection allows me to take short breaks and to check my own thoughts. Because you can't do both. You can't focus with one mind on what I'm doing and what you're saying. We're switching back and forth very rapidly. It seems we're doing the same thing, but that's not true.
So the object is not the object you're focusing on.
Pardon?
Let's say you're doing shamatha for some object.
When you're doing shamatha, yes, you're not losing the object.
But if you're switching to another object, if you're
Briefly,
it's coming.
yes, briefly you are. Otherwise it doesn't make sense. When you apply introspection introspection doesn't have to be, no, with introspection you're not switching to another object as such. You're checking whether your internal object is still, you see, introspection means, like you can, how can I put it? When you meditate, you're not concentrating on anything outside of yourself. So when I said introspection, I meant when we're talking to each other, my mental consciousness is focused on you, on what you're saying, but I'm then using introspection to check what my mind is doing. So in that case, there's a switch back and forth. But when I'm meditating, then introspection, then I'm totally directed inwards. So you're just checking whether the object is still the meditational object. So you don't have to switch, right? You're just checking, is the object still? So introspection just means you're focusing on your own mind. When you're doing that, is the object still breathing? So I don't think you're actually going, what is my mind doing? That would be, you lose your object. But you're just focusing, is it still a breath? Yes. Breathing, yes. So if you have single-pointed concentration, anyway, your introspection becomes very subtle. It's just kind of checking every now and then, but when you don't have single-pointed meditation, then of course you're going back and forth, you have different ideas, and your introspection sometimes focuses on the breath and sometimes focuses on you thinking about dinner. So the object changes, but just because your mind's object changes all the time. So you see the difference. But if your object is the same the whole time, with the same stability and the same clarity, then your introspection doesn't switch. It's always the same object. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that's, again, that mental factor solely from the perspective of checking, is it still the same object or not? In this case, it can also, your introspection doesn't have to check, is it the same object? It wants to check, while I'm talking to Tomer, am I having nasty thoughts or not? What is my motivation talking to him? We talk about two types of motivation. A motivation that precedes an action and a motivation that exists simultaneous with the action. Have you heard of that? Right? That's really important as well. As you're continuing, if you generate any kind of action, before we engage in an action, we're supposed to generate bodhicitta, a positive motivation. So we do that in the morning, but ideally, if I now go out and I speak to Tomer, ideally I generate bodhicitta before that to be sure I talk to him for his benefit. But my self-centered mind is very used to not thinking of anyone but myself, so it's going to creep in when I'm talking to him. So I have to remind myself. And so that's the motivation that arises simultaneous with Tügekulung. It means actually the time Tügekulung. It means the motivation that arises at the same time as I'm doing something.
Then you have to already familiarized.
Well, you familiarize yourself by way of introspection, right? How do I familiarize? Because initially I lose it. Oh yeah, I wanted to do it for his benefit an hour ago, but now as I'm talking to him, it's only for myself. So now I use introspection again and again. The stronger my introspection, the better I am at familiarizing myself, as Doris said, familiarizing myself with doing it for his benefit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the thing that brings you back, for instance, when you said that you went to what's for dinner,
Mm-hmm.
you were in the introspection and they said what's for dinner, what brings you back, it's introspection or mindfulness?
What brings you back? Oh, that's Dunia's question. It's important. So let's say when you meditate and you want to focus on your breathing, and now you think about your dinner. So what is it that brings you back? Well, I would yes. Pardon? Introspection, but also mindfulness, because mindfulness reminds you, I want to stick with breathing. I'm checking. No, but I'm not. You see, like what makes introspection come into effect is recollecting what I actually want to do, right? Oh, what am I focusing on? Breathing. Okay, am I focusing on breathing? No, I'm thinking about dinner. Okay, right? So first there's introspection. So you have attentiveness. Those are the three, actually. You need attentiveness, attention, right? Focus, intention, mindfulness, and introspection. Attention helps you to stay on the object. Mindfulness helps you to remember to stay on the object, and introspection helps you to check whether you're on the object. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And that's what we usually mean with mindfulness. So when we say mindfulness in the West, when I say usually, it means like the kind of mindfulness that's famous in the West, actually is not a mental factor, but it's the coactivity or the cooperation, let's put it that way, the cooperation of these three mental factors. Vigilance, or attentiveness, vigilance, recollection, that is the word for mindfulness in Tibetan actually, and introspection. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm a little bit, but I made this huge mistake in the write-up anyway, and I haven't had time to change it yet. So I don't know, should I go into the text? But there were so many great questions. Okay, let me just check. There were a lot of good things. There's something about self-centeredness, and Gyaltsen Hamu said Venerable Yangda asked about, isn't there just one cause of samsara? Well, first of all, there are many causes of samsara, but there's one root cause of samsara that's described to be the root misperception. That is true. But sometimes craving is also described as one of the root causes in some of the traditions, but I also believe if you wanted to talk about two main causes, okay, the absolute root cause, the absolute single root cause, I mean, in the end, it comes down to that root misperception. Why? Because that's what we have to remove, and we remove the rest. From that perspective, we talk about one single root concept, or root affliction. Okay, we talk about one single root affliction, which is ignorance. But that's just from the point of view of what we actually have to remove to get rid of everything else. But there's another way to talk about two roots, one from the point of view I just mentioned, but a second one which directly is responsible for the other afflictions. Because if there wasn't self-centeredness, I don't think we had to worry about ignorance. If our ignorance didn't give rise to self-centeredness, we wouldn't have the problem we have now, do we? Why would we get angry? If I'm not obsessing over myself, I only ever get angry if someone harms me. We say sometimes, I got angry with the injustices in this world. That's not a real anger. We're not getting angry with the person, but more with the action itself. And that doesn't even qualify for actual anger. According to His Holiness in one of his texts, in one of his books, I don't remember which book, maybe Secondary Ethics. No, what is it called? Not secondary. Secular ethics. I think in this book he says, he's not even sure, being like, this is not okay. Excuse me, start spitting. This is not okay. It's not all right that this is going on in this world. I need to do something. That kind of right? It feels like anger, but I don't think that's the kind of anger that wants to go out and harm anyone. It rather wants to stop other people from harming themselves and others. No, but here when we say anger, it's to do with the I. So everything comes down to that self-centeredness. Directly our afflictions arise from that. I would claim if there were no self-centeredness that arises from ignorance, and the problem is, of course, it does arise from it, but if hypothetically it didn't, we wouldn't have the problem we have now. Does anyone disagree? I wouldn't have attachment to anyone. It's not like, oh, make me happy. I wouldn't be like, what is it with attachment? I feel this thing makes me happy. But that's being attached to I and my happiness. If I didn't have that, why would I be attached to anyone? This is just something I'm throwing out there.
Bodhisattva
Yes.
does not have self-cherishing.
A bodhisattva has no self-cherishing, you're saying. Of course a bodhisattva has self-cherishing, but not as strong as we do. Initially they do, eventually they get rid of it. So bodhisattvas also have self-cherishing. When they enter the path, they have self-cherishing, but it's so weak. It's become so weak, and their cherishing others is stronger.
But isn't bodhicitta and self-cherishing contradictory minds?
On bodhicitta and self-cherishing contradictory minds.
You
Yes.
have bodhicitta and self-cherishing.
Very compassionate bodhicitta are also contradictory. There's nothing which is both.
No, not in this way.
Not in this way, but this is the way contradictory is used in philosophy. So if you were to say that in a philosophy, in the debate, take the subject. The contradictory just means there's nothing that is both. But in other words, can you not have both arise at the same time? No, you cannot. They don't arise at the same time, but they arise at different times.
Is it once someone enters the path, they have bodhicitta at all times?
Do they have bodhicitta all the time? What about the bodhisattva in deep sleep? It follows bodhisattvas no longer sleep because they have bodhicitta all the time. And bodhicitta in the beginning is of course mind. So we can't sleep at night. Can't sleep because bodhicitta, no. You see, there is a tradition which is Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen's tradition. That's a very important distinction. Now in the Gelugpa tradition, you have many different textbook writers, and two are quite, let's put it that way, most widely spread, because there's Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen. So 2 of the 6 colleges that are left, you have 3 main monasteries, and they're divided now into 2 colleges, each one of them. And so there's Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen, who's the textbook author of 2 of these 6 colleges, and there's Penchen Tsongkhapa, who's also the textbook author of 2 of these colleges. So, you know, their writings have a lot of influence. Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen says this. He says, even when the mind lies dormant, it's there. But it doesn't mean it's actively there. Penchen Tsongkhapa says, no, for a mind to be there, it has to be manifestly there. If it lies dormant, it's not there. But it's not a big deal. They both agree that bodhicitta is not always active. So when you say, isn't bodhicitta always active, I'm asking you, are you talking like someone who follows Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen or Penchen Tsongkhapa? If you follow Penchen Tsongkhapa's view, that I'm more used to, so it seems more right to me, but in the end it's just a matter of habit, then if you follow Penchen Tsongkhapa, bodhicitta is not always there. If you follow Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen, it is always there, but it's not always active. Does that make sense? So it's not always there. In other words, it lies dormant. At the time when you realize emptiness directly, it's not there. Right? Does that make sense? But anyway, Venerable Gyaltsen Lamosh used this beautiful analogy of the 2 mountains, of like one mountain is yourself, kind of you're stuck on that mountain. Ooh. Stuck in a power cut. You're stuck on that mountain, and in the other case, you're stuck on, and then you try to get on the other mountain. And then Bernd asked, are you looking of others as like one block, as just one thing, or are you talking about all other sentient beings? I think in your practice it should be all other sentient beings actually. So in response to what he said regarding that, I don't think I can address all of this, but Neil asked some important questions. I thought these were really directly relevant. I mean, all the other ones are also really important, but I have to make a choice. So let me look at Niels. I thought Niels was really important. Let me read it to you. So the explanation of the 3 ways things can be one entity is helpful. Okay, but I've added the mental factors. So I've added an extra complication. So 3 relationships plus the relationship of the mental factors, right? So you have 4, basically. Okay. Everyone's comments and debates are really wonderful and mind expanding. Okay. I'm a bit confused. Okay, now listen. I'm a bit confused about the way that emptiness, dependent arising, and the lack of intrinsic existence were explained as relating at this 18-minute mark. I was first thinking, what is the 18-minute mark? But then, of course, 18 minutes, after 18 minutes, I guess, into the class. So there was this discussion between emptiness, dependent arising, and the lack of intrinsic existence. All right, remember? We had that discussion. Dependent arising, emptiness, and what was the other one? Lack of intrinsic existence, yeah. It was explained that dependent arising is related to emptiness in that it is a part or characteristic of emptiness. Denjin Dewa Jungwa. Okay. In Tibetan, that works. In Tibetan, it works. Because Denjin Dewa Jungwa can be used in Tibetan the way we use an adjective. You can say emptiness is Dendil or Denjin Dewa Jungwa. So Dendil is the Tibetan word for dependent arising, but it's actually just a short version of Denjin Dewa Jungwa. So having arisen in dependence and in relation to other things. Other things is not mentioned in that term. But I can say emptiness has arisen in relation to, I can use it that way. In English, it's a little bit harder because it's a noun. So to say I'm a dependent arising sounds awkward, doesn't it? So I'm a little bit, I'm dependently arisen. I'm a dependent arising. That's a hybrid Tibetan, that's English hybrid Tibetan, that's Tibetan, no, what's it called? Buddhist hybrid English, as Tika would call it. She's right. I don't know whether she coined the term, but she used to say it. So, okay. Let's say, okay, everything that exists is a dependent arising. Let's agree on that, however odd it sounds, because we'll mean everything is dependently arisen. Okay, but is everything emptiness? That's different. What is emptiness? It's the state of lacking intrinsic existence. It's the state of lacking intrinsic existence. So am I the state of lacking intrinsic existence? Because emptiness is necessarily of the true truth. What is it? It's an ultimate truth. Ooh. Emptiness is an ultimate truth. I say emptiness and like so on. That's auspicious. So emptiness is an ultimate truth. Therefore, if I wear emptiness, it follows I'm an ultimate truth. Right? If I wear emptiness, I would have to be an ultimate truth. Do I lack intrinsic existence? Or to put it differently, am I empty of intrinsic existence? Yes. Am I that state of intrinsic existence? In other words, emptiness? No. I'm not emptiness. Right? I'm not emptiness because emptiness is necessarily an ultimate truth. Emptiness is a slightly hidden truth. Am I slightly hidden? No. I'm right here. No, slightly hidden means you can't see me with your sense consciousnesses. I'm not slightly hidden because you can see me with your sense consciousnesses. Of course, you see my body, but because I'm labeled also on the basis of my body, saying you see my body means you can see me. Right? It's correct to say you see me. Am I slightly hidden? So I'm not slightly hidden. I'm slightly hidden because I'm emptiness. No. Reason is not established. I'm not emptiness. I'm not the state of lacking intrinsic existence. Now, applying this to the state of dependent arising. Am I dependent arising? Let's say I am. However awkward that may sound in English. Am I dependently risen? Absolutely. Right? As I said, in Tibetan you can say, I'm Dendil. I'm, okay, it works. It doesn't sound odd. In English it sounds a little odd, but never mind. So, I'm dependent arising. Yes. Am I the state of dependent arising? No, because the state of dependent arising is slightly hidden. It's hidden, right? It's slightly hidden. It's like the coarser levels we can understand, of course, but the subtler levels we cannot. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so therefore, what I meant here was, it was explained that dependent arising is related to emptiness and that it is a characteristic of emptiness. Yes. Emptiness is dependent arising. Therefore, it's a characteristic of emptiness. It's a part of emptiness, right? Dependent arising is not emptiness. Emptiness is dependent arising because we use dependent arising like an adjective as a characteristic. Is emptiness the state of dependent arising? No. No. The state of dependent arising is a conventional truth. So to be a state of dependent arising, we have to be a conventional truth. So it's the dependent arising itself as that phenomenon, so the state of dependent arising. That's what I meant with it. Does that make sense? So emptiness is dependent arising, but emptiness is not the state of dependent arising. Neither is the state of dependent arising emptiness. But when I say lack of intrinsic existence is dependent arising, and dependent arising lacks intrinsic existence. It works both ways. Does that make sense? That's how we use the words. I'm just saying, that's how the words are used in English and in Tibetan. Okay, that was his question. So it's related. But I thought that lack of intrinsic existence and emptiness are synonymous. No, they're not synonymous. They're sometimes said to be synonymous, but that's not literally true. Because if they were really the same, when you realize one, you have to realize the other. Lacking intrinsic existence and dependent origin being empty of intrinsic existence and dependent arising. Okay, they are synonymous, but when you realize one, you don't realize the other. Okay, that doesn't follow from that, just because they're, but still, they are, so emptiness, so the reason I just gave was wrong. Just because you don't perceive one when you perceive the other, that doesn't mean they're not synonymous. But emptiness cannot be, the dependent arising cannot be emptiness, for the reason I just gave. So they can't be synonymous. Or in other words, okay, let's put it that way. It's very easy to check whether something is synonymous or not. Is whatever, so being empty of intrinsic existence and being dependently arisen are synonymous. How can I check? Whatever is dependently arisen lacks or is empty of intrinsic existence. Whatever is empty of intrinsic existence is dependently arisen. Do we agree? Okay. So that's how we know they're synonymous. Now let's take emptiness and dependent arising. Whatever is emptiness is necessarily dependent arising. Yes. Whatever is dependent arising is necessarily emptiness. Is that true?
Why?
Yeah. So, I mean, he answers in the debate language. He means no. Right? He's not actually questioning it. Because in the debate language, you don't say no, you say why. Because you want a reason. But never mind. So Tome is basically also saying no. So whatever is dependent arising is not necessarily emptiness. That's why. For instance, I'm not emptiness because I'm not an ultimate truth.
But wasn't the question if lack and emptiness are the same word?
Wait, but I thought that lack, okay, wait. Oh, yeah, you're right. No, wait, there was something else.
Lack of
In that is a part. Okay, it was explained that emptiness is related to emptiness and that dependent arising is related to emptiness and that is a part or characteristic. It's explained that lack of intrinsic existence and dependent arising are synonymous. But I thought that lack of intrinsic existence and emptiness are synonymous. Oh, yeah, that's it. Sorry, that's what I misunderstood. I thought that lack of intrinsic existence and emptiness are synonymous. Again, doesn't work. Take the subject I. It follows I'm emptiness because I lack intrinsic existence. Therefore, it works the same way as with emptiness and dependent arising. Whatever is dependent arising is not necessarily emptiness. Whatever is emptiness is necessarily dependent arising. You can exchange dependent arising for lack of intrinsic existence. Whatever lacks intrinsic existence is not necessarily emptiness. Whatever is emptiness necessarily lacks intrinsic existence.
But the lack of intrinsic existence.
No, lack, empty of intrinsic. I say empty of intrinsic existence.
So if you say the lack?
No, I don't say the lack.
No.
I say empty.
Now you have to hold.
The lack. I'm not going to say lack. Lack is weird anyway. Lack is weird. We're not lacking intrinsic existence. It seems like we're lacking something. No. We're so used to using it that way. But I like to say empty. Empty of an inherent existence. Empty of inherent existence and emptiness are not synonymous. Shouldn't they have the same relationship to dependent arising in that case? Well, they have the same relationship to dependent arising because both empty of intrinsic existence and emptiness are dependently arisen. They have the same relationship to, but not to each other. I'm not sure of how emptiness and dependent arising could be separate. In Lama Tsongkhapa's The Harmony of Emptiness and Dependent Arising, he writes, verse 11, when one perceives empty as the meaning of dependent arising, empty of inherent existence does not contradict the function of agent and action. It doesn't say emptiness in verse 11. It only says empty in the sense of empty of intrinsic existence. And the commentary by Venerable Losang Gyatso says verse 11 of Tsongkhapa's text indicates how closely emptiness and dependent arising are related. Yes, that's true, they are. One is the meaning of the other. But meaning of the other, again, like I said, it's not literally the meaning of the other, but one explains the other. That's why you cannot take this literally. If they're the meaning of each other, then aren't they synonymous? Yeah, but in this case, it's so widely accepted. They say meaning, 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 they're the same. They sometimes say the same. They even say they're the same. But it's understood, not exactly the same, but they do say means the same thing. They sometimes say means the same thing. But that can't be taken literally. When I talk about the state of dependent arising, the state of emptiness, they're not of one nature. They're contradictory. One is not a part of the other. Yeah, the state of. Okay. All right. It's a lot of it is semantics. A lot of it is semantics. You see, what you find is that we're obsessive with words. When you study philosophy, there's this incredible emphasis on precision. You only use a word in a particular way, but that's why our debates are precise. Sometimes debates here are all over the place. I know what you mean, I think I know what you mean, but everyone uses a slightly different term. So when you ask, that seems, no, I meant such and such. So you have not learned yet to use the vocabulary. That's what we learn so much as part of our education. To first agree on a particular term and use it consequently. Not make it eloquent. You can be as ineloquent as it gets. You know, like when you write something, you can use the same word over and over again. It's not about, like in beautiful English. That's why there are some translators, some English translators, who emphasize too much eloquence. Their philosophical teaching, when they translate poetry that is not used for debate, beautiful. When they translate texts that are used for debate, disaster. Disaster in the sense you lose the original meaning, because the authors in Tibetan, for instance, or in Sanskrit for that matter, they made sure that the words were used, even if it was repetitive. They didn't worry about that. They were used in such a way that you could debate it, and it was very precise. And the Tibetans did the same. Although sometimes they used different words, it didn't matter, but then the words were defined in such a way that everyone knew exactly what was meant. But in English, in order to write beautiful English, you try to use synonyms, yeah. Cinnamon and synonyms. Get those two mixed up. Synonyms, you use synonyms. And if they have a different meaning in philosophy, you have a problem. What you think is a synonym in English is not necessarily a synonym in philosophy, and then you have a huge problem. Is your internet gone? Rika is asking, is your internet gone? No, it's still here?
It's just alive.
Okay, mental factors would be like interfaces on the same instance. What is an interface?
Computer term, but I don't know if it's used in another way.
Pardon?
I know it's in a computer term, but I don't think it's used.
It's a computer term. I don't know about interterm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to compare generalities, instances, and so on with the classes. Instances, interfaces, inheritance, in object-oriented software development. I have to first become a computer expert to be able to answer. That makes it, yeah, if it's better to use everyday examples. Yeah, it's better to use colors and shapes and things we can all understand. Unfortunately, yeah, that's too difficult for us. I first have to study all this and understand it properly. That would be difficult. Okay, electricity is coming and going. All right. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say today. We may start a little bit, we may go back a little bit to what I said before about just before class started, I read it again and I realized I made a huge mistake. I got so confused. Even if it makes sense to you, no. Okay.
Question.
Yes, please, go ahead.
It's about emptiness and cause and effect not being
But emptiness and cause and effect being?
not being contradictory.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I sometimes feel that when I try to think about emptiness of objective existence
Mm-hmm.
and things existing just as a mere imputation like in the basis of this thing,
Mm-hmm.
there is nothing of a thing,
Mm.
it's only designation. And I try to think like this in this way,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't feel like how cause and effect would come to be in a consistent way.
Mm.
Like
Mm.
it
Mm.
feels like why would it why would a mango seed give rise to a mango sprout necessarily? Like what gives it the power to give it? Or with karma, like why would an action of killing,
Mm.
which is like in the action of killing, there is in its basis like this action, there's nothing of a bad and nothing of a killing which can be found. So why would it always give rise to an effect of suffering? And both the cause and effect like empty objective existence and only merely designated. So I think like this, it feels to me like there is contradiction.
Okay, so Tomia's question is a very foundational, very essential question about how is it possible that on one hand phenomena don't exist intrinsically, they're merely labeled, and on the other hand you have like a barley seed that gives rise to a barley sprout. I don't know, mangoes. Yeah, I guess. Did you keep a mango for a really long time and start working? Started growing? No, I'm kidding. So we have if you use the mango seed, it turns into a mango sprout. So all that happens. There's no randomness in the sense that one day a mango seed gives rise to a barley sprout. That doesn't happen. So there's this consistency on one hand that one phenomenon has the potential to give rise to only that, in the case of the mango seed. But then on the other hand, phenomena are merely labeled, they don't exist in and of themselves. There seems to be a contradiction, that consistency on one hand and that being merely labeled.
I don't know how, but even if you think about just the thing itself, it doesn't make sense to me. Okay, it's empty objective existence, but how it exists and it's merely labeled, like we feel like they make sense together. Because what is this cup if you don't have this concept of cup? This sort of makes sense to me, but when cause and effect really does not make sense.
Okay, so what Thomas says, it kind of makes sense. Yes, we label the cup and it's on the basis of its parts. We call it a cup and so forth. All that makes sense. But then how does cause and effect still work? This is one of the most difficult ideas, of course. But I mean, I think we just don't understand emptiness correctly. We're negating too much. The moment we get into, I mean, because it's a sign that you've negated too much, because cause and effect no longer makes sense. And don't leave you alone. I mean, join the club, right? Because what is it? What is that saying? It takes one to know one. It takes one to know one. So, in other words, I only know because I'm just like that. So therefore, in the sense, what I find really helpful, and it's such a silly example, actually, but like, remember I talked about the photographs, taking photographs of these moments when a seed gives rise to a sprout. So you take all these pictures and you put them up on McCloud, and every photograph is numbered, and I ask you, when is the exact moment that now it's called a seed, and that, well, it's still called a seed, and now it's become a sprout, right? On each picture, you have like in every minute you took a picture. So when is the exact moment? You can't decide on an exact moment. You see a photograph of the first moment and you see a photograph of the last moment. Very clear. When the sprout is fully grown, when the seed is still in the stage of not having transformed. That time is very clear. Lots of pictures in between. But the closer the two are together, the more you meet at the time when that transformation's very difficult to say, because it's merely labeled. So we're saying that from the side of the object, there's nowhere that the seed is saying, I'm a seed, look at me. And suddenly it's saying, oh, I'm no longer a seed, I've given way to a sprout. That's what we mean. There's nothing from the side of the object. We just call them that. But that doesn't contradict the fact that this particular object there, that is just labeled, nevertheless gives rise, when it transforms into a sprout. Right? The combination of the different atoms, though they're merely labeled, when they come together, different atoms having, I don't know, having accumulated in a certain way, they now have a certain ability, and so therefore they transform into the sprout. You see? So both work. I've just labeled it seed, sprout, and therefore, I could have called it something different. I mean, each moment it's different. I mean, just from the point of view of impermanence, each moment is totally different. So I give it this label as if it were permanent. I call it seed for like how many hours, although each moment is totally different. I call it a sprout for like the next few hours, although each moment is totally different. So it doesn't even make sense to believe that it's a seed in and of itself. That suggests permanence, by the way, right? Because I call it a seed, therefore there's a sense it's a seed the whole time because I call it that, because it qualifies as a seed, so it must be permanent. In actuality, there's just constant change. Look at the room, look at this room. If you had now an eye consciousness that were like an atomic microscope, you'd only see atoms. But we kind of put like lines around these atoms. Right? We put lines around these atoms, we call something this and call something that in relation to how we use it, in relation to how it appears to us, and so on and so forth. Right? So it all works, it's all there. It's also just an appearance to my mind. I mean, these atoms, like let's say these atoms, the way they appear to me, because of my karma, they appear in that way. For instance, take to mind the bowl of liquid. Three people look at the same object. They only have one collective karma, that it's a liquid. They have the karma to see, all the three of them see it as liquid. But the human sees it as water, the preta being sees it as nectar, and the celestial being sees it as... No. The preta sees it as blood and pus. The celestial being sees it as nectar, and the human sees it as water. So they have a collective karma seeing as liquid, but that's it. So what is that? It's very difficult, by the way, to add as an extra difficulty. They're all part. The nectar is a part of that liquid. The going back to part and wholes, the nectar is a part of it. The liquid is a part of it, and the water is a part of it. Ooh, very difficult. But never mind that. They're also one nature, therefore it's one nature with each of them, but never mind, even without that difficulty. But no, sorry, I just wanted to confuse you. But no, the thing is going back to emptiness. So therefore, these objects are mere appearances to our mind, dependent on our karma. But even our mind is mere appearance. It's also merely just labeled. It appears in a certain way, and it's merely labeled, and so are the objects around us. And still, there is a certain consistency. There's certain laws, right? Because merely labeled doesn't mean we've made them.
No, but we need some experience to categorize it, and that is necessary to be able to really...
Yes, so we do categorize objects with a conceptual mind. Yes, and so these are all coming from the mind itself. I mean, like when we categorize every object that looks similar to this and call it table, as if there was some tableness found within it, that's where the problem comes in again. But that's the balance between the two. The balance between the two. So what you're doing, why is it difficult? Because you look at the world based on your misperception. And so do I. So whenever you reflect, That misconception is part of the reflection. And the misconception seems to suggest the opposite. Inherent existence. That's the problem. So you're using a mind totally influenced by ignorance to understand something that is the opposite. That's why it's so difficult. Yeah. So all we can do is do it again and again and again and again and again to take away the power of the ignorance on our mind so that we slowly, but yeah, you have to do it again and again and again and again. And not just intellectually, but really try to do it in a way in which it influences you emotionally. Can't find the self. That's huge, right? Can't find the table. Can't find this person over there I don't care about. I mean, don't start with a stranger in Uganda or something, someone you've never met or whatever, right? No, start with yourself, where we're so convinced. It's so solid. Those people we're attached to. His Holiness. Ooh, when His Holiness does the meditation on emptiness on himself, I'm like, ooh, right? I mean, we have so much faith in His Holiness. Amazing. But if he's not intrinsically amazing, that's really difficult. He must be intrinsically amazing, right? So emotionally, there's this emotion, strong emotion. If anything happens to His Holiness, we're upset. That shows we see His Holiness as intrinsically His Holiness. Our lamas, they're intrinsically there. We're intrinsically attached to them. And our attachment is a Dharma attachment. It's not like we want to hang out with them all the time, but we want them to be there and to teach us, right? Some have that, kind of groupie that's there as well. Okay, let's face it, right? But not everyone has that. As Venerable Kumbhana knows very well, she's had to deal with groupies. I don't think you're a groupie, but I'm pretty sure you've got groupies to deal with. So no, of course there's that groupie attitude as well, but even without that, those who don't have a groupie attitude, even in that case, still intrinsically so. So that's where the emotions are. Where do our emotions lie? Those ones. Wherever there's a strong emotion, one way or another, check, right? Like if there's you're attached to someone specific, they don't exist intrinsically, and see how, right? And that's a really good direction because the emotions come in. Emotions need to come in. If it's just in the head, it's kind of doing like math in your head. Oh, 1 and 1 is 2. It doesn't emotionally affect us at all. So if you do the intellectual part, it has to go on to a deeper level. That's what Dishtup Belsan, who's such an amazing practitioner as a meditator, he always talks about the emotions. And His Holiness does too. His Holiness has said on many occasions, emotions have to come in, emotions. Yeah. So what can I say? Sorry, I can't answer your question.
If you think about the seed,
Yes.
why does it give rise to this result?
Pardon?
Why does the seed give rise to this specific result?
Why does it? Because it just. Why does a seed? Because it's impermanent. Why is the seed give rise to a particular result? Because it changes moment by moment, right? And so, just because it changes moment by moment, gives rise to the next moment of that entity. Whether you call it a seed or not, or whatever you call that next moment, as it so happens, it interacts with other things and it changes its entity. Our mind is always a mind, by the way. But physical objects, okay, they remain physical objects, but they transform, like the shape transforms, yes. So why? Because it just is. Because it just is. There is sometimes no answer. Why are conditioned phenomena impermanent? They just are.
But when I also come to this conclusion, but because
Okay.
it just is.
Because it
But
just
then
is.
I feel it's like this is sort of like intrinsic existence.
It's inherently so when you use inherent existence in a different way. It's naturally so. So I said that before. There is a bit of a problem we have, and in Tibetan you have the same thing. In Tibetan, Rangxin Gitruba. Rangxin in Tibetan actually means nature. So the Tibetan word for intrinsic or inherent or for natural is Rangxin. And it's used sometimes to describe the object of negation, and sometimes it's used in an everyday kind of way It is natural for a seed to grow into a sprout. It's inherent. You use that. In Tibetan, you say that. You don't use it exactly the Rangshinki Tuba, like this. That's not really used that. But you could use it. You could use it. So they avoid doing that. But because the way they put it, it is so by way of its nature. Instead of saying it's natural to it, that would be like it's natural to it. They say it's by way of its nature. And in that way, they kind of say it's an absolute inherence. It's inherent, therefore it doesn't depend on anything else. That's what they deny, right? So inherent can mean it's natural to it, right? It's just natural. We don't have to do anything. It just, we don't have to. In other words, we don't have to do anything. It's going to be like that, right? That's what it means, natural. So when we take water, the temperature of water, let's say having a bowl of water here, is it hot or not? Is it natural? Is it in the nature of water to be hot? No, I have to do something. I have to heat it up in order for it to be hot. Someone has to do something. But is it natural for water to be wet? Yes, I don't have to do anything. It's wet. That's how we look at it, right? But that's just an ordinary way of looking at it. Taking it from a philosophical point of view, not only do I not have to do anything, if it were inherently wet, not only do I not have to do anything to make it wet, you don't need anything else to experience it as wet. You don't need any other phenomenon to be wet. It would just be wet. And that's what Buddhism denies. That's what it's denying. It just is that without depending on anything else. That's what means absolute naturally existent, absolutely inherently existent, absolutely independently existent. Not naturally existent in dependence on the fact that I don't have to heat the water. I don't have to teach the seed to become a sprout. Okay, seed, listen well. You're only in first grade. You better become a mango sooner, a mango sprout, right? No one else. So it's like, I don't have to contribute. I have to add maybe a little bit of water, a little bit, but then it does its own thing, right? So that's why this is the closest word we have to everyday kind of, so the Buddha used everyday words. And lack of intrinsic existence is beyond words, right? It's beyond words. So what was the closest word in English that you can even still use conventionally, naturally, inherently? No one is banning that word to be used. You can still use it. That's the closest to the idea we're here looking at, in being naturally like that, intrinsically, inherently like that. Because we're saying it's totally independent in that way. It just is. It's in its nature to become a seed, to become a sprout, and therefore it doesn't need anything else. Does that make sense? Yeah. So look at this natural. Look at this natural. So in general, we can say it is natural, but only in relation to something else. In relation, or in, it's in, for instance, when we say fire is hot, it is in relation to how I experience fire. If my skin, a stone, doesn't feel hot, doesn't feel heat. It feels hot to us. That's different, right? Why is fire hot? Because it feels hot to me, to my skin. If I had a skin condition, and we all had it in this world, we all had the same skin conditions that we perceived 1,000 degrees as cold, what would fire be? Right? What would fire be? Well, it just happens to be such that we live in a world where we pretty much agree on, and not everyone does. We had that whole discussion about when is a place hot or not. Is it hot in Dharamsala now? Well, someone who just arrived from Delhi would probably say, no, it's cold. So you see, therefore, the point is, it is not inherent. It's not really natural to the fire in an absolute sense, because it's only in relation to perceiving it that way. Now let's look at the seed and the sprout. Is it intrinsic in the seed to become a sprout? No, because there's no seed or no sprout unless someone calls it that. There are subtle atoms that have been transforming. So your question is not, why does the seed become a sprout? Because that can be answered. A thing transforms in such a way, I call it seed one day and the next day I call it sprout. That's really the answer. What is the actual answer is that it changes moment by moment. Why? Because that's in the nature of the things around us. They change. Am I making sense? Did I answer your question? No, I didn't answer that question. Like, no way I could answer that question. But just 1 second. Rika asked a question a long time ago. So Rika asked, 10 minutes ago, yeah. We had a discussion the other day if the nature of mind is permanent. If so, does it have inherently existing characteristics? Like the nature of the mind is aware and clear and is inherently luminous. I don't think it makes sense, but my friend pointed out correctly that Kagyu teachers like Mingyur Rinpoche express it this way. I was wondering if this is different on the gross and the subtle level. All right, same discussion we just had. We can talk about the nature of mind, the inherence of mind. Again, here, Mingyur Rinpoche, I believe, is talking about the nature in terms of just conventionally. Right? The nature of mind as being clear and knowing. If it were inherently clear and knowing in the way like is used in emptiness, then it wouldn't depend on anything. It wouldn't depend on an object. Right? So when we use the word naturally, it means we don't have to do anything to make it that way. Right? The mind naturally is clear and knowing, which means, it doesn't matter what happens, it's clear and knowing. But it still depends on objects to be so. Like if what does it mean to be clear and knowing? Clear means that something can appear to it. Knowing or clear and aware, actually knowing is a little bit clear and aware. I prefer the word aware. So the mind naturally has things appear to it and it's aware of them. That is true for every moment of consciousness. If it were inherently so, it would mean, by definition of inherent, well, it doesn't have a definition because it doesn't exist, but if it did exist and it would be defined as nothing else is necessary. You don't need anything for a mind to be anything other than the mind for it to be clear and knowing. Then you don't need an object. You don't need an object. A mind is clear and knowing in relation to an object that appears and the mind is aware of. So that's what it means. Therefore, the nature of mind is permanent. Okay, the discussion, if the nature of mind is permanent. It depends on what you mean with permanent. And it depends on what you mean with nature. The ultimate nature of mind is permanent. Right? The ultimate nature of mind is permanent. What is the ultimate nature of mind? It's lack of intrinsic existence. That is permanent. But the nature of the mind saying that it's clear and knowing, no, that is impermanent. That's a characteristic of the mind that is ever changing. Each instance of clear and knowing is different. For a moment, something dynamic. It's not static, right? So therefore, the nature of mind is permanent. It depends. I mean, in general, mind is not permanent. Mind changes all the time. But when you say nature of mind, it needs to be specified. What do you mean with nature of mind? The ultimate nature of mind or the nature of being clear and knowing? That is impermanent. The ultimate nature of the mind is permanent. Does it have inherently existing characteristics? No, it doesn't have any characteristics that do not depend on something other than itself. No single, like, what are the main characteristics of the mind? As I said, being clear and aware, and for that it needs an object at the very least. Okay. Like the nature of mind is aware and clear and is inherently luminous. You see, in ordinary English, you could say inherently luminous. It would be okay because it means naturally luminous. But luminous is a really funny word. Luminous is really just used the same as clear. Luminous is not like it's illuminating things. Some people say that, but that's actually misleading, as if it was like a torch, literally throwing light on things. So it can be a little bit misleading, that term. Sometimes people say it illuminates things. It apprehends them. They appear to it. Anyway, never mind the word. It doesn't matter. Sorry, what did you say?
We use Rangshin for nature of mind in Kagyu.
We have to be careful.
Ranxing no shetam.
Ranxing what?
Ranxing no shetam.
Ranxing.
No she.
Mwishi.
No shetam.
Mwishi means clairvoyance.
No she, to know, to recognize.
Ngoshitsam, ale ngoshitsam. Ale, sorry. Ngoshitsam, ale ranxing ngoshitsam. Yeah, but the thing is, we have to understand the terminology. That's the thing. They use similar terms, or sometimes the same words in the Kagyu tradition, in the Nyingma tradition, but they define them differently. So we cannot use our Giluk understanding and then look at the terminology there and think we understand it. We don't. That's why you have to teach. You have to work with the Kagyu Lama, like someone qualified, like Kyabje Mingyur Rinpoche, for instance, and then ask. And they usually are familiar with some of fortunately, with the Giluk ideas and can see where our misunderstanding comes from, saying, no, don't think like that. We study the different traditions, and it was so hard. In the beginning, for me, a term had this meaning and nothing else. And to undo that was quite difficult until I realized when I didn't understand a thing, it was just because I didn't understand the words. And I had to redefine words to be sure I understood them. And that took some time. Yeah, therefore, it's very important when you study the different traditions, study with someone who's fully qualified. Study with a qualified teacher, not to get confused. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So Rika says it was answered. Alan says, John and Bas do think that the nature of the mind is inherently... Oh, yeah, sorry, you were first.
Can you elaborate a bit on, I always forgot, isolate?
An isolate, yes.
To have a deeper understanding. What an isolate is just...
Is there a deeper understanding of an isolate?
Yes.
All right, so what is an isolate? Yeah, that's such a weird... But do you love isolates?
Entities and isolates.
Isolates?
Yeah. Usually we learn entities and isolates. Yeah?
Right.
Together.
Yes. You can use entity and item.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Do you love that? Now you do. Initially, it's so difficult. Yeah. No, isolates. It's so hard. Is there a deeper understanding? No, I don't think it's deep as such. It's just a matter of getting used to it. You know, like when I said earlier, you can isolate things from. You can kind of talk about. A phenomenon that in actuality, like a table, for instance, when my eye consciousness perceives it perceives it with all its different characteristics, right? My eye consciousness cannot separate them, can it? No, for my eye consciousness, the whole thing is perceived in an affirmative way. But my conceptual mind can artificially isolate things out, right? It can isolate things out. It can talk about table itself. We had that discussion before, right? The generality table. As if that doesn't exist as such. Out there in the world doesn't exist, right? So that's like a generality. I'm not talking about an isolate here. I'm just saying the generality table. It does exist because it exists in every table, but not separate from the table. Although we isolate it out from every table, conceptually.
What do we isolate out from every table?
The characteristic of table. As if, you know, like it sounds a bit like that. Conceptually, what does our mind do? It takes all the table in the world and takes out that tableness and throws it up in the air and says, that's table. That's how it feels, right? A little bit. Like, I mean, as if that was possible.
And where is that isolate?
Well, no, I'm saying just isolating that. I'm not finished. So I'm isolating it. I'm isolating in that way. Now, when I say the isolate of table, I'm not even doing that. I'm not even saying it's a generality of all phenomena. I just say table without specifying, without saying it's contained in every table or whatever. No, I'm just saying table. I totally isolate it in that isolating it from everything else that is not one with it. That is called the isolate of table. So there's different ways of isolating things. I can isolate things in the sense that, like I just said, I conceptually think about just table as like encompassing all other tables, as if there was something out there that existed that way, which is impossible. But I can do it conceptually. But I'm still not isolating in such a way, the table, I don't isolate it in such a way that I don't take anything to mind that is connected to it. I connect it to every table. So I'm isolating it in that way. I can say I isolate it in the sense that I kind of artificially take it out of every table that exists and create this category. It's kind of an isolating process, but I'm still relating it to instances. But then I say just table. Just table. That's the absolute isolate. I mean, that's the more, you can't isolate anything any further. Does that make sense? You cannot isolate it any further. Now I'm not relating it to anything else. I just say table. That's the isolate of table. As in like, what's the isolate of table? Taking just table and saying nothing else about it but table. As if that was possible. Of course, that's not. In actuality, such a table doesn't exist out here. It is created by my mind. But because it's created by my mind, it works. It's not that it doesn't exist. But it's not that it exists out there that I can say, oh, that is the isolate of table. That is impossible. Right? And that's not a phenomenon that exists isolated from anything other than itself. Because it's not isolated from its impermanence and so forth. But conceptually, I can do that. And so what is the isolate of table? Table. You can't isolate something more than that. You can't isolate a table more than saying the isolate of table is table. Does that make sense? You can't isolate it any further. Tell me, does it make sense?
Yes, but no.
What is the no part? What doesn't make sense?
I don't know if it's exactly what you're saying, but the isolate of pot is not pot. And pot is isolate of pot.
Oh, the isolate. Oh, okay, that's the difficulty. So the isolate of pot, because it's so in this case, you can really use the word abstract. The isolate of pot, because when we say, what is a pot? It's that thing that is impermanent and changing and everything. But the isolate of pot is not that. It is not that. So first of all, isolate is permanent. We already had. The isolate is itself permanent because there's something that is permanent and an isolate at the same time. So we say isolate is permanent. So thus the isolate of pot must be permanent. That's one thing. But also the isolate of pot, it's just that conceptually created abstract that has that cannot be found here as an actual pot. It's not an actual pot. It doesn't perform the function of a pot. Because for it to perform the function of a pot, it must have parts. But the isolate of pot, the way I took it to mind, has no parts. Right? Therefore, it's just an abstract version of pot, just saying pot, rather than an actual pot.
Isolate of pot.
Pardon?
But then how would that actually confuse me?
Pot is the isolate of pot, because pot is just pot. Because pot is a pot. That's what confuses you. Oh, okay.
I can accept one direction. I can accept isolate of
Okay,
pot.
isolate pot is not pot. But a pot is the isolate. What else would be the isolate of pot? What else would be the isolate of pot? Is there anything else but the pot? Right, the pot. You see, there's how can I put it? It's kind of a bit like saying, pot is impermanent, but impermanent is not pot. Right? It's a bit like that. So the pot itself can be all sorts of things and still exist. But that doesn't mean it goes the other way around. Does that make sense? So the pot can be that, but it can be many other things as well. If I say the pot is the isolate of pot, I'm not negating that the pot is also impermanent. But the isolate of pot means it is just that and nothing else. Therefore, the isolate of pot cannot be a pot, because then the pot cannot be anything else but just be a pot. Does that make sense? I love isolates. Okay, so Alan says, John and Buzz do think that the nature of the mind is inherently clear, aware, and luminous. But then we have to talk with John and Buzz, what do they mean with inherently? How do they define inherently? There has to be a whole conversation, discussion just about terminology. First, the terminology has to be defined. Yeah, so you can't just sit down and talk. That's a bit like saying, is Buddhism a religion or not? People sit down and discuss it forever. But what do you mean with a religion? First, define to me, what is a religion? Does it accept a creator God? Then Buddhism is not a religion. Does it include faith? Well, then it's a religion, but then lots of other things are also religion because we have faith in a lot of things. So it all depends on, is it an institutionalized kind of belief system? Yeah, institutionalized, yes. Just belief system is more than that. Belief is just temporary. It's supposed to come to an understanding. So anyway, see, it depends on how you define things. And I don't know, in the Jonabad tradition, I'm pretty sure they say the same as in the Gelug tradition, just with different words. And therefore, I don't know, inherently, what do they mean with inherently? Ban says something can appear to it is different to something must appear to it. What? I don't understand. Something can appear to it. Something can appear to it in quotation marks. So something can appear to it is different to something must appear to it. I know, I get it. Something can appear is the same as something must appear. That's true. Is an isolate rather like a way I treat something with my mind? Mind dependent on, Is an isolate, the context was mind dependent on objects. All right, the mind depends on objects. Yes, that's very true. Something can appear to it, but it doesn't have to appear to the mind. That's true. It's dependent on, but something has to always appear. No, first, when you say something can appear, something doesn't have to appear. Well, when you mean something specific, I agree, but something always appears to the mind. Otherwise, it wouldn't be clear knowing. So people sometimes say, well, what about in deep sleep? Just blackness appears. Still something appears, right? I don't know what appears in deep sleep because I don't remember what the experience was, but there's always a mind. A mind is always clear in knowing, which means there's always something appearing and the mind is always aware of something. So let's say it's blackness, it's darkness, blackness, nothingness. That still appears. Yeah. So there's still something. Nothingness exists. Well, no, nothingness doesn't exist because something exists. But nothingness in the sense it can still wrongly appear to my mind. Nothingness. No, a little bit complicated. But yeah, like a darkness or something. But an object is always there, even if it doesn't exist. Right? I mean, the horns of a rabbit can appear to my mind. They don't have to exist. Is an isolate rather like a way I treat something with my mind than being a phenomenon? Okay, I think what it means is this an object I isolate with my mind? I just conceptualize rather than being an actual tangible object. Yes, it's not tangible. That's why it's permanent, it's not tangible. A vase is tangible, right? So an isolate is not something tangible. It's not something, it's basically isolated by my mind. This is our problem. We have these overlays by the mind. The mind overlays things. It selectively, like when we talk about the meaning generality, it's a selective representation of things. It selects things out. It excludes certain things. And therefore, it's kind of selective. And a very simplified version of what's really there. And so a conceptual mind is so helpful, but at the same time, we believe in this world based more on our thoughts and see this world in a very simplified way, which does not allow change moment by moment. Right? Everything, I keep calling it the same thing. I have this overlay of it's like, it's a seat, it's a wall, and I believe it's permanent. So the interplay between our sense consciousnesses and our conceptual minds, it's very strong. There's passing back and forth of information. But because our conceptual mind perceives things in a permanent way, because it simplifies things too much, and of course there's also the appearance of intrinsic, but even without that, you don't need to even add that for explaining just how the mind has these overlays or has these simplified versions. So we see the world in a simplified matter. It has advantages because we can make sense of the things around us. I can identify this is a table, this is a person, this is this is that. But it's a simplified version of what's actually there. Right? I guess if we really saw it for the way it was, it'd be really overwhelming. But subtle impermanence is a first step towards understanding how it really is. But yeah, anyway. Sorry, that went on for a long time. So we didn't do anything. We didn't do any text today. I still have to do the text. I don't know whether I find the time to rewrite it. But it was like just before class, so I couldn't do it. I'll try. Now I really want to finish this year's material, but what to do? But the thing is, I'm not that oriented towards like finishing the text. I just want to discuss these things. I want to make sure you have a little bit of a background to understand all this, because it's not about finishing text. You finish the text. In the West, we have that sense like if I finish that text, I've done something. But it takes a long time to go through it, and it needs a lot of other information that needs to be given. So I think that chatting about other things the way we did and addressing some of these issues may be helpful. Anyway, we'll continue with the text next time. All right. So. Yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't go into all of your questions. I couldn't even remember all of them, but I've read every one of them and I thought they were all amazing. So thank you very much for all your inputs. Okay, let's do the dedication. In the snow-encircled land, you're the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Denzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, thank you.